You ever work so hard that your absence becomes the loudest thing in the room? That was me. 8 years in the same company, showing up early, staying late, fixing everything quietly. Kevin, my boss, collected applause like it was his birthright. I collected late-night emergencies, quiet responsibilities, and the kind of stress that doesn't show until you finally step away from it. For a long time, I thought that was normal. I thought hard work naturally lived in the shadows, while the leaders stood under the spotlight. I didn't realize how invisible I had become, how my name disappeared from the work I built, until the day I finally walked out. Only then did I understand how much the system depended on me staying silent. I didn't plan revenge, not at first. I planned escape, recovery, sanity. But revenge, it grows in the empty space your absence leaves behind. It takes root naturally when the structure collapses without you. The first time Kevin stole an idea from me, it was small, a mosquito bite. We were in one of those pointless morning meetings where half the room scrolls on their phones under the table. I floated a solution. Kevin repeated it louder with fake confidence and that polished trust me smile. Everyone nodded at him, not me. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself it was just a moment. But mosquitoes don't bite once. Soon, he was copying entire summaries I wrote and delivering them as if he came up with them mid-shower. He'd join email threads late and pretend he'd been contributing all along. He'd take my slides, swap the title, and call it teamwork. Meanwhile, I was the one troubleshooting server failures at midnight, writing fixes before sunrise, keeping clients calm. I was exhausted, but in a quiet, invisible way. Then Ridgepoint happened. Ridgepoint Tech wasn't a normal client. They didn't tolerate fluff or corporate theater. Their lead, Sarah, was sharp and observant. During our second call, she asked, "Who actually runs this account? Not who's the manager, not who oversees this, but who actually did the work." I answered honestly, describing the workflow, the fixes I'd already implemented, the systems I built before they even realized there were problems. Sarah listened, really listened, and she remembered. That was dangerous in a company like mine. Because once someone outside sees the truth, the internal illusion begins to crumble. We built trust quickly. She appreciated responsiveness, clarity, consistency, all the things Kevin lacked, and Kevin noticed. Oh, he always noticed when praise drifted away from him. He started hovering over my desk more, poking into Slack channels he never cared about, forwarding my work under his signature. And then came the breaking point. The big Ridgepoint strategy meeting, the one I stayed up 3 nights preparing, the one that contained weeks of analysis. I walked into the conference room early to rehearse and froze. My deck, printed, bound, sat on the table. Kevin's name was on the title slide. My throat tightened, not in anger, not yet, but in a kind of cold, detached recognition. The kind where your brain quietly says, "Ah, so this is what we've become." Kevin strutted into the room wearing a suit slightly too tight in the shoulders, like he was squeezing himself into a version of success he hadn't earned. He greeted executives he barely knew, smiled too wide, took the remote like it was a trophy, and then he presented my work, word for word, slide for slide, insight for insight. He delivered the content with the cadence of a man who expected applause, and he got it. Polite corporate applause that made my skin crawl, but Sarah watched him differently. She watched him stumble over terminology I had explained to her. She watched him gloss over details he didn't understand. She watched the inconsistencies between his voice and my documentation. She watched me sit silently. She saw everything. That day, something inside me didn't break, it shut down. I left the building feeling like I had stepped out of my own body. Like I was watching someone else live my life, take my credit, shape my future without me. 2 weeks later, I submitted my resignation. No drama. No confrontation. I didn't need validation. I just needed peace. Leaving felt like stepping out of smoke I didn't know I'd been breathing. For a month, I rested. I slept through entire nights, my shoulders unclenched. Weekends became weekends again instead of catch-up days. I remembered how it felt to wake up without dread, and then the messages started. A text from a coworker. "Hey, is everything okay with Ridgepoint?" Then another. Kevin seemed stressed, just asking. Then an unknown voicemail. Then Kevin called. His name lit my phone like a warning light. I didn't answer. He called again the next morning, and again that evening. Then emails arrived, urgent, frantic, thinly disguised. "Ridgepoint is having issues. Please call me, it's important. We need your help." I ignored everyone. Then the company itself emailed me. "Ridgepoint is dissatisfied. Please contact us immediately." And that was when I knew everything was collapsing exactly the way it should. When I ignored every message, every call, every urgent email, I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I was simply done. Done being responsible for problems someone else created. Done being the invisible backbone of a system that pretended I didn't exist. Done fixing things for a boss who couldn't even explain the solutions he took credit for. But the universe has a way of circling back. After a week of silence from me, my phone buzzed again, this time from a number I recognized instantly. Ridge Point, I answered. Sarah's voice wasn't angry, it was exhausted, flat, as if she'd spent days putting out fires without the firefighters who once knew the map. She didn't waste time. Is this a good moment? She asked. It is now, I replied. There was a short pause, then she dropped the truth with surgical precision. Your company isn't delivering at all. We've missed 3 deadlines. I've sent emails that were answered with generic templates. Issues we flagged went unresolved for days, and when we finally escalated, Kevin didn't have answers. I nodded to myself, unsurprised. Sarah continued, I don't need to tell you this, but things ran better when you handled the account. I felt a complicated mix of validation and bitterness. It was like hearing someone praise a house you built while watching the new owner burn it down. Then came the real hit. We terminated the contract. Those words hung in the air like smoke. Millions, gone. The company's biggest client, severed without hesitation. And Kevin, his frantic calls suddenly made perfect sense. Sarah wasn't calling to gossip, she was calling with intent. I need to ask, she said, would you consider consulting with us directly? Short-term, project-based, we need stability. And frankly, you're the only one who provided it. My heart thudded, not in fear, in clarity. This was the moment everything shifted. I'm open to it, I said. Send me the details you need handled, and I'll tell you what's possible. She exhaled, a relieved, genuine sound I had never once heard from Kevin. Thank you, we'll draft terms. As soon as the call ended, my phone lit up again. Kevin, this time I answered. His voice was tight and strained, a far cry from his usual performance confidence. We need to talk, he said immediately. No, I said, you need to talk, I'll listen. He hesitated, thrown off. All right, he said. Can you come in for a meeting? Tomorrow? I agreed, not for him, not for the company, but to close a chapter with the same clarity I'd shown leaving it. When I walked into the conference room the next morning, Kevin was already there. He looked smaller somehow. The expensive suit didn't hide the stress sweat. The practiced smile was gone. His eyes darted around like he was waiting for a blow. He opened awkwardly. So how have you been? I'm fine, I said flatly. Let's get to the point. He swallowed. We need help. Ridgepoint is threatening litigation. They say we mishandled the account after you left. I tried to stabilize things, but he stopped, searching for the right lie, then gave up. Look, we need you back. Something flickered in his voice, not respect, not remorse, desperation. What are you offering? I asked, though I already knew. Your old job, he said quickly. Same salary, same position, and maybe a performance bonus after quarter end. I smiled, but not out of humor. He genuinely thought my loyalty could be bought at the same discount price he'd valued it before. No, I said simply. Kevin blinked, stunned. What do you mean no? You're unemployed. No, I repeated calmly. I'm not. He stiffened. Well, whatever you're doing now, we're offering stability. You're offering what I walked away from, I replied. There's no stability in repeating the same mistake. His frustration bubbled. Look, I know the past had misunderstandings. But this is a new chance, we need you. I reached into my bag and slid a folder across the table. What's this? He asked. My consulting proposal. He opened it. Inside, scope, timeline, deliverables, boundaries. And at the bottom, the rate, 3 times my old salary. Kevin choked. He actually coughed like he'd swallowed a bone. This is absurd. No, I said, leaning back. It's the fair market value for someone who does the job you pretended to do. His face flushed with something between anger and humiliation. You're extorting us. No, I said again. I'm finally being valued correctly. Whether you accept it or not doesn't change that. He shoved the folder closed. We can't pay this. Then you don't get me. His jaw tightened. He tried a new angle. We can negotiate. I'm not negotiating, I said. This is the price. He snapped the folder shut and stood abruptly. Then this meeting is over. Agreed. He stormed out, slamming the door harder than it deserved. I remained seated for a few seconds, breathing slowly. For the first time in years, I felt no fear, no doubt, no hesitation, just clarity. Outside the conference room, I passed by a coworker, Alex, who gave me a knowing look. How'd it go? Alex asked. Exactly how it needed to, I replied. Alex hesitated, then lowered their voice. Want to hear something? He's having a breakdown. Management's furious. Ridgepoint left a crater. I didn't smile. Not out of kindness, but because it wasn't done yet. 2 days later, Ridgepoint emailed me directly. The contract was ready. The rate was accepted. The timeline was mine to define. I read the agreement slowly, absorbing every line. Fair payment, clear credit attribution, autonomy. Everything Kevin had refused to give for 8 years was now on paper, from someone who had recognized my work in 4 weeks. I signed it. Hours later, the first payment hit my account. 3 times what Kevin thought I deserved. Not bonus, not charity, not pity, value. That night, I sat by my window, city lights reflecting off the glass. I wasn't gloating. I wasn't replaying old wounds. I was something far simpler. at peace with the price I finally placed on myself. Meanwhile, inside the company, things deteriorated fast. Kevin was pulled from all client-facing duties. Executives called emergency meetings. An internal audit was opened. People whispered, "Not about me, about him," and the best part, I didn't have to lift a finger. I watched it unfold from a distance, like someone reading the end of a play they'd already left the stage of. Inside the office, the quiet panic was a physical thing. Emails with subject lines in all caps, a flurry of all-hands meetings, HR scheduling interviews that felt less like career conversations and more like damage assessment. Kevin moved through it like a man sleepwalking. He still smiled at people, but the grin no longer reached his eyes. Executives who once nodded along at his presentations now asked direct, pointed questions in meetings. He answered with the kind of vague phrases that sounded good at networking events, but didn't fix syntax errors at 3 a.m. The audit they launched turned into a slow, digging worm of discovery. Misplaced attributions, undocumented decisions, a pattern of we that in practice had meant someone else. Rumors became a chorus. People muttered in hallways. Some teammates who had once pretended ignorance began whispering about missed Slack messages and ignored escalation threads. The company's internal culture, the thing that lets people believe illusions for too long, started to buckle. It was messy. It was human. It was inevitable. I did my work with Ridgepoint. I rebuilt trust the way a builder repairs a foundation, methodically, visibly, and with receipts. Each email had timestamps. Each deliverable had documentation. Each fix had a clear owner. There was no theater. There was only a ledger of what got done and when. Ridgepoint responded with appreciation, then with referrals, then with steady, routine business. The money was good. The work was satisfying. The nights were calmer. I kept my head down. I refused to become a spectacle. I refused to fuel gossip. The most potent part of what happened was not the demotion or the memos or the meeting transcripts that floated through internal channels. The most potent part was the cultural shift. People began documenting, not because of me, because the system had been shown to fail when it relied on charisma over competence. The company instituted clearer attribution protocols. HR rolled out training on crediting individual contributions. Small changes, but real. Kevin's role changed. They moved him to an internal-facing position that looked cushier on paper. It was a velvet box with thin walls. He'd still have a title, still have meetings, still walk past the same elevators, but the clients, the accounts, the pressure that once fed his performative confidence were gone. He started arriving later. He started taking longer lunches. The performance he'd built his identity on had been stripped of its audience. People said I was vindictive. They said I'd taken pleasure in his fall. That wasn't it. If anything, the stern part of me felt relief for everyone involved, including Kevin. When illusions collapse, people are forced to confront their competence. Some rise, some don't. He had built a life entirely dependent on optics and had never learned the quieter craft of doing the work itself. The consequence was, sadly, predictable. We exchanged the occasional email after the worst had passed, not sentimental, not accusatory, functional. Once, months later, he sent a brief note, "Hope you're well." I replied with the kind of honesty that exhausted me for years. I work with people who notice and credit work. That's enough, he didn't reply. It was a small punctuation mark in a sentence that had long since ended. With Ridgepoint secure and my consultancy stable, I started to think about other things. I built rituals back into my life. Saturday morning coffee became a sacred thing. I took long walks I'd once scheduled between meetings. I read fiction again. I met friends for dinner without checking my phone every 10 minutes for urgent pings. Slowly, the parts of myself that had atrophied under fluorescent lights began to wake up. But the professional changes were the most interesting. My name started to circulate in a new way, not as the ghost behind Kevin's slides, but as the professional who fixed things. Referrals came via Ridgepoint. Other clients who had heard whispers reached out with projects that needed clarity and honest work. The market responds to competence when it can see it. I had documentation to prove my value and past clients willing to vouch. There's a practical morality to this story. It isn't about karma as poetic justice. It's about aligning incentives. Systems that reward optics over outcomes will always be brittle. When you remove the person holding the facade together, the system collapses. The collapse wasn't elegant. It hurt people. It exposed vulnerabilities. But it also forced accountability. If you work in places where credit disappears into thin air, here's what I learned in practical, sometimes cold terms. 1. Document everything. Stash drafts, email timestamps, collaborative documents. Make the trail undeniable. 2. Build direct relationships with clients and stakeholders. Trust is difficult to manufacture, but easy to sustain when you show up consistently. 3. Price yourself fairly. If your labor subsidizes someone else's image, your leverage is real when you realize you can walk. Know your rate and don't be shy about it. 4. Leave strategically, not impulsively. Walking out is powerful, but it should be a considered move. Have options. Fewer dramatic exits, more planned departures. 5. Keep your dignity. Don't become the same thing you criticize. You can win by being professional and competent, not by resorting to pettiness. I don't want this to sound like a sermon on corporate justice. There are injustices I still wrestle with. I know colleagues who stayed and got promotions they don't deserve. I know people who burned out and left altogether. No payoff, only exhaustion. Systems are messy, and sometimes the right person loses. This story is a narrow example of when things worked in favor of the person doing the work. The final piece of the arc is small and human. One evening, a year after the Ridgepoint contract shifted, I met Alex for a drink. They'd been one of those quiet allies at the company, someone who forwarded my messages to the right people, and once stayed late to copy evidence that I'd forgotten to archive. We sat on a bar stool, city lights bleeding into the glass behind us, and Alex asked casually, "Do you ever regret walking out?" I thought for a while. The question landed like a pebble in a pond, and the ripples told me the truth. "No," I said, "I don't regret it. I regret that I stayed so long without asking for what I deserved, but I don't regret leaving. Leaving was how I reclaimed my life." Alex smiled, but it was the tired smile of someone who'd seen a lot. "We all liked you," they said. "We noticed." "You noticed quietly," I replied. "Exactly." That night, I walked home breathing in a way I hadn't in years. It wasn't triumph or gloating. It was relief and quiet resolve. I had priced my worth and the market agreed. The work is still the same, messy, deadline-driven, occasionally infuriating, but it's mine. I sleep. I answer to myself. I own what I do. The story ends not with a fireworks display, but with a small, steady light. The kind of light that means you can pay your rent, take a vacation without asking permission, and say no when someone offers you the same old crumbs in a different box. If you're listening because someone is stealing your credit, because a manager takes your work and turns it into a personal brand, don't act out of spite. Prepare, document, build relationships, price your value. And when you leave, do it with a plan, because sometimes the most surgical revenge is the restoration of your own life. There's a line I like. Someone else said it better than I ever could. Don't litigate the past, legislate your future. I tried to do that. I legislated a future where my work had clear ownership and my life had clear boundaries. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was full of small things I'd been missing: sleep, time, recognition that came without performative applause. It wasn't a period slapped on the end of a sentence. It was the new paragraph I'd been drafting for years. And Kevin. He still exists in the same city, probably at the same building, with the same tie slightly off-center. The difference is he no longer gets to tell a story that isn't his to tell. That to me feels less like revenge and more like correction, the world adjusting its ledger finally. So that's it. I walked away, I priced myself, and the system corrected. Not always pretty, not always fair. But sometimes, when you do the work and record it, the world notices. And when it does, you become unignorable.